Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Historian, a quiet corner where the past drifts in softly, and forgotten worlds return as gentle stories for the night. Tonight, we'll be wandering into your life as a teenager in ancient Rome and beyond, into the emotional worlds of medieval courts, the careful medical expectations of Victorian Britain, and the early ambitions of a young Alexander who once stood at the edge of empire before he was fully grown. Together, these moments show how different societies shaped youth long before anyone used the word teenager the way we do today. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's slowly step into the past, softly, gently, together. You wake before the sun reaches the rooftops. It is not silence that wakes you. Silence rarely visits this part of Rome. Instead, the morning arrives as a slow layering of small disturbances. Somewhere below your window, a mule stamps its hooves against stone. A rooster calls once, then again, with the confidence of something that believes it controls the sky. A neighbor coughs through a thin wall. Someone upstairs drags a wooden stool across the floor, and the sound travels down through beams like distant thunder moving across low hills. You are not alone in your sleeping space. Your brother has rolled closer during the night, his shoulder pressed against your arm beneath a shared blanket that smells faintly of wool and smoke. Near your feet sits a basket of folded clothing that also serves as storage for tools your father uses during the day. There is no clear boundary between sleeping room and working room here. In homes like this, space behaves more like weather than architecture, shifting quietly according to need. Outside, the street has already begun to breathe. A baker opens his shutters somewhere nearby. You can smell the first warm scent of bread moving slowly into the cool air between buildings. Another voice follows, louder this time, announcing olives that are almost certainly not as fresh as promised. Street vendors in Rome often begin exaggerating before sunrise, which is their way of greeting the day politely. Roman law once tried to protect sleep by limiting carts during the night, but rules and reality do not always agree with each other. Even now, you can hear a wagon rolling carefully along the stones, its wheels clicking like small knocks against a distant door. You sit up. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, still cool from the night. In wealthier homes, it might be smooth stone instead, but here the ground keeps its rough texture, reminding you where you stand each morning before anything else has begun. A narrow stripe of early light slips between the shutters and rests briefly across the wall before shifting away again. Near the doorway, a cat moves quietly between two baskets, pausing only long enough to decide whether this household has anything interesting to offer today. Cats in Rome belong mostly to themselves, though they pass through many homes as if conducting inspections. From the other side of the wall comes the sound of voices already arguing about bread prices. No one lowers their tone. Privacy in this building is less like a rule and more like a polite idea that everyone agrees not to test too closely. Here, reputation begins early each day, carried through thin plaster and shared staircases long before anyone steps into the street. Your mother is already awake. You can hear her moving near the small hearth, adjusting a clay cup, setting something aside, speaking quietly to herself in the rhythm of someone arranging a morning before the rest of the household has caught up. In Roman families, mothers often shape the tone of the day before it begins, reminding children where they are expected to go and how they are expected to behave once they arrive there. Outside, another vendor calls out again, louder now, insisting that his figs are the sweetest in the district. His confidence travels farther than his cart. You stretch your arms and listen carefully. Morning in Rome does not arrive all at once. It gathers itself slowly, like a pale sky filling with drifting clouds. First the animals, then the vendors, then the neighbors, then the footsteps on the stairway. Each sound reminds you that the city has already begun forming the person you are expected to become. In a quieter district, Perhaps in a larger house with painted walls and a small interior garden, another teenager is waking differently. A servant may already be waiting nearby with sandals. The floor beneath their feet will feel smooth and cool instead of rough and uneven. Their breakfast will arrive sooner, arranged carefully on a tray. But here, your morning begins with movement rather than ceremony. Lucius, who lives 2 doors below, is already awake as well. He sits near his family's doorway, tying a simple cord around his tunic, while his younger sister still sleeps beside a basket of folded wool. He listens for his father's voice in the stairwell. When it comes, it will mean the day has officially begun. Until then, he waits quietly, watching light gather along the opposite wall, as if it were something he could measure with patience alone. Soon he will step into the street beside you. Soon both of you will begin learning the same lesson that every young person in Rome learns without being told directly. The city is watching, even before breakfast. And somewhere just beyond your doorway, the first steps of that long education are already waiting. By the time you reach the doorway, the light has changed slightly. It is still early, but the city is no longer stretching awake. Now it is moving. Somewhere below, footsteps pass along the street in steady patterns, and the smell of warm bread has grown stronger, drifting upward through the stairwell like a quiet invitation you do not entirely need. Morning in Rome rarely begins with hunger as much as it begins with habit. Your mother places a small piece of bread into your hand. This is breakfast, though the Romans call it intaculum, a word that sounds more formal than the meal itself. It is not meant to be large. It is meant to begin the day without slowing it down. Most people eat standing or walking, sometimes even while speaking to someone already waiting near the doorway. The bread is firm, with a crust that resists your first bite slightly before giving way. In wealthier homes, it might be softer, baked more recently, served with olives or a small piece of cheese. Here, it is enough on its own. You chew slowly, tasting yesterday's grain and the faint dryness of stored flour. Beside it, there is a cup. Inside the cup is wine, though not the kind you might imagine at a feast. It has been mixed carefully with water, creating a drink that feels lighter and safer than plain water alone. In Roman households, this mixture is ordinary, even for the young. Clean water is not always reliable, and diluted wine is considered both practical and proper. It is not meant to make anyone dizzy. It is meant to keep the day steady. You take a sip. The taste is gentle, almost uncertain, like fruit that remembers being sweet but no longer insists on it. The clay cup leaves a faint coolness against your fingers. Nearby, someone upstairs laughs briefly, then stops, as if remembering that morning still belongs to work rather than conversation. In another home across the street, a servant is carrying a wooden tray through a painted hallway. On that tray are figs, cheese, and fresh bread still warm from a private oven. The teenager waiting there will not step into the street immediately. First, there will be sandals tied carefully, hair adjusted, instructions given, a few quiet reminders about posture, courtesy, and the people they are expected to greet later in the forum. Breakfast in Rome is never only about food. It is also about position. Even the floor beneath your feet participates in this quiet lesson. Here, the packed earth keeps its coolness longer than stone would. When you shift your weight, the surface answers gently, reminding you again that homes like this are built to hold many lives at once. Tools rest near sleeping blankets. Storage baskets lean beside cooking jars. The space changes purpose throughout the day, the way a kitchen changes its smell from morning bread to evening smoke. Flavia, who lives one stairway above, is already helping prepare a tray for her younger brother. She moves carefully, balancing a clay cup in one hand and a folded cloth in the other. Her mother watches without speaking. These small movements are lessons: how to carry food, how to arrange objects neatly, how to prepare something before being asked twice. She does not think of this as training. It feels more like helping. But one day, She will perform these same gestures in another household entirely, and everyone there will assume she has always known how. She pauses for a moment near the window. Outside, the vendor who promised sweet figs earlier is still repeating his claim, though now with less confidence. Someone nearby responds with laughter that carries upward through the narrow space between buildings. Morning conversations in Rome often begin with exaggeration. It is one of the city's softer traditions. You finish the last of the bread and brush the crumbs from your hands. There is no long pause after breakfast. Roman mornings do not leave much room for lingering. Instead, the meal becomes part of movement itself. Already, your mother is reminding you which street to take and which neighbor to greet properly if you see him near the corner shrine. Reputation begins with very small choices, and mornings are full of them. Some fathers speak during this time as well. You may hear fragments of conversation about taxes, about a dispute between two shopkeepers, or about a public speech expected later in the forum. These topics pass across the table as lightly as bread itself. No one announces that you are learning politics. It simply arrives beside breakfast and stays there quietly. In wealthier households, the same pattern unfolds with different objects. There, a servant might hold the cup while instructions are given. A tutor might already be waiting nearby. The doorway opens not toward a crowded stairwell, but toward a courtyard with painted walls and a small pool reflecting the morning light. Yet even there, the lesson is the same. Food prepares the body. Conversation prepares the future. You set the empty cup aside. Somewhere below, Lucius has already stepped into the street. You can hear his sandals striking the stone in quick, familiar rhythms as he joins the flow of people moving toward the forum. Soon, you will follow him, carrying with you the taste of bread, the faint sharpness of watered wine, and the quiet understanding that mornings in Rome are never only about waking. They are about beginning to be seen. When you step out into the street, the city is already speaking. Not loudly at first. It begins in layers. Sandals striking stone in uneven rhythms. A cartwheel turning somewhere farther along the road. The soft brushing sound of a broom moving yesterday's dust into a narrow pile beside a doorway. None of these sounds ask for attention, yet together they form a pattern that guides your steps before you even realize you are following it. Rome does not wait for you to arrive. It expects you to join. The air carries a faint mixture of smoke and olive oil from nearby kitchens, along with the sharper scent of incense rising from a small shrine at the corner. These shrines stand quietly where streets meet, holding small offerings left by people who passed earlier than you. A pinch of grain, a drop of wine, sometimes only a whispered greeting. Even when no one pauses, everyone notices them. You adjust your path slightly as you pass. Small movements like this matter. In Rome, people learn early that the street remembers how you behave, who you greet, where you pause, how quickly you walk. These details travel farther than footsteps. Ahead of you, Lucius is already weaving through the crowd with practiced confidence. He does not hurry, but he does not hesitate either. The city rewards that balance. Too slow, and you seem uncertain. Too fast, and you appear careless. Somewhere between the two is the pace of someone who belongs. Vendors line the edges of the street now. One lifts a basket high enough for passers-by to see its contents clearly. Another repeats the same promise about freshness he made earlier, though this time he adds a new detail about how early he woke to prepare his goods. People smile as they pass. No one asks whether the story is true. Morning trade in Rome often begins with performance as much as with exchange. You continue walking. A group of apprentices stands outside a workshop doorway, watching their master arrange tools on a wooden table. None of them are speaking. They do not need to. Learning here often begins with observation rather than instruction. One boy reaches forward carefully and lifts a small hammer only after the master nods once. The gesture is quiet, but everyone nearby understands what it means. Permission has been given. Across the street, another kind of lesson is taking place. Two older men are already deep in conversation about a disagreement between neighbors. They speak slowly, repeating names and details as if arranging pieces on a board only they can see. A younger listener stands beside them, silent but attentive. No one explains that he is learning how arguments move through a community. He simply listens until the rhythm becomes familiar. In homes throughout Rome, mornings often begin this way. Letters written by Cicero describe fathers greeting visitors shortly after sunrise, standing near their doorways as clients arrive one by one to offer respect and request advice. Children watch these meetings from nearby rooms or stairways, learning without being told that public life begins at home long before it reaches the forum. As you turn the corner toward a wider street, the crowd thickens slightly. Here the sound changes again. Voices overlap more closely. Sandals strike stone in faster patterns. Somewhere ahead, a metal cup falls and rolls briefly before stopping against a step. No one reacts strongly. Rome is full of small accidents that do not interrupt the day. Marcus walks just ahead of you now. He is keeping close to his father, who pauses every few steps to greet someone passing in the opposite direction. Each greeting follows a familiar shape, a nod, a brief exchange of words, sometimes a hand placed lightly against another shoulder. Marcus watches carefully. He does not speak unless spoken to, but his attention is steady. One day, these greetings will belong to him as well. His father stops again near a man wearing a darker bordered tunic. Their conversation lasts slightly longer this time. The tone is respectful but serious. Marcus shifts his weight and studies the ground while they speak. He cannot follow every word, but he understands enough. Some conversations are meant to be heard. Others are meant to be observed. Further along the street, sunlight slips between two tall buildings and rests briefly across the paving stones. Dust rises where people pass through the light, turning each step into something visible for a moment before it disappears again. Movement in Rome rarely goes unnoticed. Even shadows participate. You pass another shrine. This one holds a small painted figure darkened by years of smoke. Someone has left a fresh flower beside it. Another person touches the wall lightly while passing, not stopping long enough for anyone to call it a ritual, yet not quickly enough to call it accidental either. The city is full of gestures that live somewhere between habit and belief. Ahead, the street opens toward a busier crossing. From here, you can see several directions at once. One leads toward the forum, where speeches and disputes will soon gather like clouds over open stone. Another leads toward workshops where apprentices will spend the day repeating careful movements until their hands remember them without effort. A third turns toward quieter neighborhoods where families continue their mornings behind shaded doorways. For a moment, you pause. There is no teacher standing beside you, no lesson written on a tablet, yet already the city has shown you how to move, how to listen, and how to be seen without drawing too much attention. Rome teaches these things the way a melody teaches itself, by repeating patterns until you begin to recognize them without trying. And somewhere beyond this crossing, a doorway waits, where voices grow louder again, and learning begins to take a different shape entirely. The doorway ahead is narrower than you expected. From the street, it does not look like a place where learning happens. There is no grand entrance, no painted sign announcing instruction, only a shaded opening between two shops, and a short step worn smooth by many sandals before yours. Yet when you cross inside, the sound changes immediately. The city's voices soften behind you, replaced by another kind of noise that repeats itself in steady patterns. Students are already speaking, not to each other, but together. Rows of young voices rise and fall in overlapping rhythms, each repeating the same line after the teacher, shaping syllables carefully as if polishing small stones. Roman education rarely depends on silence. Instead, it depends on memory carried through sound. Lessons here are meant to be heard again and again until they settle somewhere deeper than attention. You find a place along a wooden bench. It is not perfectly level. One side dips slightly where others have sat before you, leaving a smooth curve worn into the grain. Benches like this are shared by several students at once. There is no clear boundary between your space and the next person's space. Elbows sometimes touch, styluses sometimes cross paths. Learning happens close together. In your hand is a wax tablet. The surface feels cool at first, then softer as it warms beneath your fingers. When you press the stylus into it, a narrow line appears immediately, dark and certain. If the line is wrong, you turn the stylus and smooth the wax flat again. Roman writing allows mistakes to disappear almost as quickly as they arrive. It is a patient material, willing to try again. Near the front of the room, the teacher speaks another sentence. This time the words are Greek. Many Roman students learn both Latin and Greek from an early age, especially those whose families expect them to speak in courts or assemblies one day. The shift between languages feels like stepping from one street into another that runs beside it. The direction changes slightly, but the destination remains the same. You repeat the sentence with the others. At first, the sounds feel unfamiliar, but repetition gives them shape. Quintilian, a Roman teacher who later wrote carefully about education, believed that memory grows stronger when speech is practiced aloud. In rooms like this one, his advice becomes part of daily routine long before anyone reads his writing. A boy across from you presses his stylus too hard. The wax curls slightly at the edge of the line. He pauses, studies the mistake, and smooths the surface with the flat end of the stylus before beginning again. No one laughs. Correction is expected here. It is simply another step in the process. Along the wall behind him, faint marks remain where earlier students once practiced their letters. Some of these marks look careful, others look hurried. In Pompeii, when the city was covered suddenly by ash many years ago, similar classroom walls preserved lines like these exactly as they were left. They remain there even now, small reminders that practice often survives longer than intention. The teacher walks slowly between the benches. He does not hurry. From time to time, he pauses beside a student and adjusts the angle of a tablet or repeats a word more slowly. Instruction here moves the way a craftsperson shapes wood, not by force, but by steady attention. Each correction is small, yet together they change how the work begins to hold its form. Outside the doorway, footsteps continue passing in the street. You can still hear them faintly. Learning in Rome rarely happens far from movement. Schools are often placed close to markets or workshops, where voices from outside drift easily into the lesson. Instead of interrupting study, these sounds become part of it. Students learn to concentrate while the city continues around them. At the far end of the bench, Lucius is copying a short arithmetic exercise. The numbers appear one beneath another in careful order, each line separated by a small space. Arithmetic in Roman schools often begins with practical problems rather than abstract ones. Counting measures of grain, dividing coin values, calculating distances between milestones on familiar roads. These exercises connect writing directly to daily life. He pauses, lifts his stylus slightly, then finishes the last line with a quieter movement than before. Nearby, another student recites a short passage from memory. The words come slowly at first, then more confidently as the rhythm settles into place. Memorization is not treated as a burden here. It is treated as preparation. One day, many students will stand in public spaces where written notes cannot be carried easily. Memory will become their strongest tool. Dust moves through a narrow beam of sunlight near the doorway. Each small particle turns slowly as voices continue repeating the lesson. Time in this room feels measured not by clocks, but by sentences spoken together. The repetition does not hurry. It builds. The teacher stops beside you. He studies the line you have written. then places one finger lightly beside a letter that leans too far forward. Without speaking, he draws the correct shape in the air once, slowly. You follow the movement and adjust your stylus. The next letter sits more comfortably on the line. He nods once and continues walking. Moments like this are brief, but they remain with you longer than the lesson itself. Roman education often depends less on long explanations and more on gestures that guide the hand until it learns its own balance. Beyond the doorway, the street is growing louder again now. Soon the lesson will end, and students will step back into the same moving city they entered earlier. Yet something has changed already. The sounds outside feel slightly different when you carry new words with you. The streets no longer speak alone. Now they answer. There is one morning in your life when the fabric you wear begins to matter more than the words you say. It arrives quietly. No trumpet announces it. No official messenger stands at the doorway. Yet everyone in your household understands that something is changing today, and they move with a careful attention that feels different from ordinary mornings. Even the air inside the room seems to pause slightly, as if waiting for you to notice it too. Your mother holds the garment before you. Until now, you have worn a tunic like any other child in the neighborhood. But today, she lifts a heavier cloth from its folded place and lets it settle across her arms. This is the toga of adulthood, known in Rome as the toga virilis, the garment that marks the moment when a boy steps into public life as a citizen rather than a child. The wool feels thicker than you expected. When she places it across your shoulders, its weight rests there with quiet certainty. It does not feel uncomfortable, exactly. It feels deliberate. Roman clothing often speaks before its wearer does, and this garment speaks clearly enough that even strangers in the street will understand what has changed. Before you leave the house, there is something else to remove. Around your neck hangs a small protective charm known as a bulla. You have worn it since early childhood. It is meant to guard you from misfortune while you are still considered vulnerable, still learning the shape of the world. Now your mother reaches forward and unties its cord carefully, as if she were loosening a knot that has been waiting for this moment for many years. She does not hurry. Objects like this carry memory as well as meaning. Some families keep the bulla afterward, placing it among household possessions as a reminder of earlier days. Others dedicate it to household spirits. However it is handled, everyone understands that its work is finished. Without it, your neck feels unexpectedly light. Your father is already waiting near the doorway. He does not speak immediately. Instead, he studies the arrangement of the cloth across your shoulder and adjusts one fold slightly so that it falls more evenly. Roman garments are not sewn to hold their shape on their own. They depend on careful positioning. Learning how to wear them properly is part of learning how to move through the city itself. Soon the two of you step outside together. The street is familiar, yet today it looks slightly different. Neighbors notice the change at once. A nod here, a quiet greeting there. No one stops you for long, but each recognition settles around you like another layer of understanding. The city has begun to see you in a new way. Lucius walks beside you for part of the distance. He says very little, though he glances once at the edge of your garment as if measuring how it rests. Moments like this are shared more through observation than conversation. He knows that his own turn will come one day, though perhaps not yet. Ahead, the streets widen as you approach the forum. The paving stones here feel smoother under your sandals. Voices carry farther between the buildings. This is where speeches are made, agreements announced, disputes settled, and reputations shaped in ways that last longer than anyone expects at the time. Entering this space while wearing the toga of adulthood means more than changing clothing. It means stepping into visibility. Your father walks slightly ahead now. He pauses near a small shrine and waits until you stand beside him again. Together, you move forward into the open area where others have already gathered. Some are family friends, others are neighbors. A few are simply people who happen to be passing through the forum at the same moment. Yet even those strangers understand what this garment means. They offer quiet congratulations as you pass. No formal speech is required. Recognition itself is enough. Roman ceremonies often depend less on performance and more on shared understanding. The forum does not need to be told what has happened. It already knows how to respond. Nearby, a younger boy watches carefully. He studies the way you walk, the way your father stands beside you, the way the cloth rests across your shoulder. He is learning without being instructed, just as you once learned by watching others before you. In Rome, adulthood is something you see long before you reach it. At home, your mother remains near the doorway a little longer than usual after you leave. She watches the street until you disappear from view, then turns back inside where the removed bulla rests on the table beside the morning cup. For her, this ceremony does not end at the forum. It continues quietly inside the house, where objects and memories change their place as families adjust to what has just begun. For girls your age, however, the morning looks different. There is no single garment that marks the same public transition. Instead, adulthood arrives gradually, through new responsibilities learned at home. Textile work becomes more serious. Household management becomes more visible. Conversations about future marriage begin to take clearer shape. The change is just as real, but it happens without the same gathering in the forum. Across the city, many households are beginning mornings like this one. Each ceremony is slightly different. Some families include larger groups of relatives. Others keep the moment small and quiet. Yet in every case, the meaning remains steady. Childhood does not disappear suddenly. It shifts position, like a bright star fading slowly as daylight grows around it. And as you stand now among voices in the forum that seem to carry farther than before, you begin to understand that the city has opened another path beneath your feet, one that leads not only forward through its streets, but outward toward expectations you are only beginning to recognize. In another house not far from the forum, the morning has unfolded differently. There is no new garment waiting at the doorway, no escort through the streets, no gathering in open stone courtyards where neighbors pause to notice a change. Yet something just as important is happening here, though it is quieter and easier to overlook if you do not know where to look. Flavia is sitting beside a basket of wool. The fibers are pale and slightly tangled where they have been washed and combed. When she lifts a small handful, they feel lighter than they appear, almost like clouds that have learned how to rest inside her palm. Her mother sits across from her with a spindle already turning, showing the motion slowly enough that it can be followed without explanation. Roman girls often begin learning these movements long before anyone calls them adults. The spindle turns once, then again, guided by fingers that move with calm certainty. The thread forming between her hands grows thinner and stronger at the same time. Each twist holds the fibers together in a way that cannot easily be undone. Skills like this do not arrive suddenly. They gather quietly through repetition, like lines written again and again on a wax tablet until the hand remembers them on its own. Flavia watches closely before trying herself. Her first turn is uneven. The thread tightens too quickly, then loosens again. She pauses, studies what happened, and begins once more. Her mother does not correct her immediately. Instead, she lets the motion settle into a rhythm that belongs to Flavia's own hands, rather than to instruction alone. Textile work in Rome is more than a household chore. Cloth shapes daily life in ways that are easy to miss. Tunics must be repaired. Blankets must be replaced. Storage bags must be strengthened before travel. Even the garments worn during ceremonies begin as threads like these. Learning how cloth is made means learning how a household continues from one season to the next. Nearby, a small wooden box rests beside the wall. Inside are carefully folded pieces of fabric that will one day become part of a dowry. Roman families often prepare these objects gradually, adding them over years, rather than all at once. Each piece carries quiet meaning: a length of cloth, a set of small tools, a jar prepared for storage. Together they form a promise about the future without needing to speak about it directly. Flavia glances toward the box once, then returns her attention to the spindle. No one tells her that the work she is learning now will travel with her into another household someday. It is simply understood. In Rome, preparation for adulthood often takes place inside ordinary afternoons like this one, where the future appears not as a sudden event, but as a steady continuation of what already exists. Her younger brother passes through the room quickly, carrying a small basket toward the doorway. He is expected elsewhere. His movements belong increasingly to the street and the forum. Flavia's movements remain closer to the center of the house. Yet both paths carry their own forms of responsibility, and both are watched with equal care. On a low table nearby, her mother has placed several clay jars. Inside them are small amounts of grain and oil, measured earlier that morning. She lifts one jar and explains quietly how to judge whether its contents will last until the next market day. These lessons are not written down. They are spoken once, then remembered through practice. Household knowledge in Rome often travels this way. It moves from hand to hand rather than from scroll to scroll. It settles into habits that appear ordinary but hold entire systems of survival inside them. Knowing how much oil remains, knowing when wool must be replaced, knowing which neighbor can be trusted to help if supplies run low. Each of these details becomes part of the same quiet education. Flavia's spindle turns more smoothly now. The thread stretches evenly between her fingers, catching the afternoon light as it lengthens. Her mother nods once, not to praise the result, but to acknowledge the progress. Approval in Roman households often arrives through gestures rather than words. It rests lightly, then moves on. Outside the window, voices continue passing along the street. Someone calls to a friend across the road. A cartwheel rolls slowly over stone. The same vendor who announced figs earlier is now offering something else with equal confidence. The sounds of the city remain present, but they reach this room only as distant reminders that other lessons are happening at the same time elsewhere. In many families, conversations about marriage begin gradually during years like these. They are not always spoken directly to the daughter herself. Sometimes they take place between parents in the next room. Sometimes they appear in small changes to daily routine: a visit from a relative, a question about household accounts, a careful inspection of stored cloth. Each moment carries meaning without needing explanation. Flavia pauses and lifts the thread slightly higher to examine it. It holds its shape. For now, that is enough. Across Rome, many afternoons are passing in this same quiet way. No public announcement marks them. No crowd gathers to watch. Yet within these rooms, futures are being prepared as carefully as any ceremony in the forum. The work may seem small when seen from the street, but inside the house it stretches forward like a long woven line, connecting one generation to the next with steady patience. By the time the middle of the morning arrives, the city begins to sound different again. The voices near the forum grow louder, but in the smaller streets behind it, another rhythm takes their place. Here the sounds are steadier and closer to the ground. A hammer strikes wood. A blade moves across leather. Someone shakes dust from a folded cloth before laying it flat across a table. Work in Rome does not begin suddenly. It gathers itself slowly, like animals settling into familiar paths they have followed many times before. Lucius is already inside his father's workshop. From the street, the doorway looks almost the same as any other entrance nearby. But once you step across the threshold, the air changes. It carries the dry scent of wood shavings and the softer warmth of leather that has been handled many times before. Tools hang along the wall in careful order. Each one rests where it can be reached without searching. Lucius does not begin by speaking. Instead, he lifts a small wooden box and places it near the table where his father will stand later in the morning. Inside the box are awls, cords, and a narrow knife, with a handle polished smooth by years of use. He arranges them quietly, matching their positions to where his father expects them to be. No one has explained this arrangement directly. He has learned it by watching. Apprenticeship in Rome often begins this way. There is rarely a single moment when someone announces that training has started. Instead, knowledge moves slowly from one pair of hands to another. A tool is passed across a table. A gesture is repeated. A mistake is corrected once and remembered afterward. Over time, these small movements become a language that does not need words. His father enters a moment later. He nods once, noticing the tools already prepared. The nod is enough. Approval here does not arrive as praise. It arrives as trust. Lucius understands this and returns to sweeping a narrow line of wood dust toward the doorway so it will not gather beneath the table. In many Roman neighborhoods, workshops like this share space with the household itself. At night, the tools rest beside sleeping mats. During the day, the same room becomes a place of trade. Children grow used to the smell of their family's work long before they are strong enough to perform it. By the time they are older, the rhythm of the craft already feels familiar, like a path walked often enough that the feet remember it without looking. Across the street, another workshop door stands open. Inside, a boy, slightly younger than Lucius, is holding a strip of leather between both hands, while an older worker shows him how to cut it evenly. The blade moves slowly at first, guided from behind. After a moment, the older worker steps away and lets the boy continue alone. The cut wavers slightly, but remains straight enough to keep. No one interrupts him. Learning here depends on trying again rather than avoiding mistakes. Further along the road, a farmer's cart waits beside a courtyard entrance. Not every young person in Rome learns a craft inside a workshop. Many spend their mornings helping carry baskets, measuring grain, or walking beside animals that must be guided through crowded streets carefully. Agricultural work remains close to the city even here. Fields lie beyond the walls, and families move between them and the markets in steady patterns that shape each season. In these tasks, strength grows quietly. A basket feels heavy at first. Later it feels ordinary. A rope feels rough at first. Later it feels familiar. Roman training often depends less on instruction than on repetition, allowing the body to learn before the mind begins to explain. Lucius pauses near the doorway as two men approach along the street. One of them greets his father by name. Their conversation lasts only a moment, but its tone carries meaning that Lucius recognizes. The visitor is not a customer. He is someone connected through a network of support and obligation that shapes much of Roman life. Families often maintain relationships with patrons who offer advice, introductions, or protection when needed. Children learn these connections simply by watching who stops at the door and how long they stay. No one describes this system as a lesson, yet it teaches quickly. Lucius listens while pretending to adjust the tools again. The visitor nods toward him briefly before continuing down the street. That small gesture matters. Recognition travels quietly in Rome, but it travels far. Near midday, the light entering the workshop shifts. Dust moves slowly through the doorway, turning in the air before settling along the edge of the table. Lucius lifts a hammer and places it closer to his father's hand without being asked. The movement feels natural now, like a young animal learning how to follow the path of an older one without needing guidance at every step. Inheritance in Rome does not always arrive as coins counted carefully into a purse. Sometimes it arrives as a doorway already open, a set of tools already worn smooth, a reputation already half-built before your name is spoken fully in the street. The work you are learning today may not be the only work you will do, but it is already shaping how others expect to see you tomorrow. Outside, the sounds of the forum drift faintly across the rooftops again. Speeches are beginning somewhere beyond the workshops. Agreements are being discussed. Names are being remembered. And here, inside a small room filled with wood dust and leather scent, Another kind of preparation continues quietly, shaping futures, one careful movement at a time. By the time you leave the workshop streets behind, the city begins watching you more closely again. Not in a way that feels sudden or unfriendly. Rome does not turn its attention toward you all at once. Instead, it gathers around you gradually, the way a change in weather settles across a neighborhood before anyone names it aloud. One doorway opens. A neighbor looks up. Someone pauses longer than expected as you pass. Each moment is small, yet together they shape how you move through the day. In Rome, reputation begins long before achievement. It begins with posture, with greeting, with the careful arrangement of clothing that tells others where you belong before you speak a single word. You adjust the edge of your tunic as you step into a wider street. Along its border runs a narrow stripe of darker fabric. Not every tunic carries such a stripe, and the width of it can signal something about your family's position in the city. Even those who cannot name its meaning directly still notice it. Clothing in Rome does not hide identity. It introduces it. A voice calls from above. Someone leaning from an upper window greets a passerby across the street. The conversation travels downward easily, spreading along the walls before fading again into the movement of the crowd. Sounds in Rome rarely stay where they begin. They move from doorway to doorway like drifting air. You slow your steps slightly as you approach a small shrine at the crossing. It stands in a shallow recess in the wall, painted long ago and darkened now by many small offerings of smoke. Someone has placed a tiny cup beside it this morning. Another person touches the edge of the stone while passing. You do the same, not because anyone is watching closely, but because someone always is. Behind you, a door opens. Your mother's voice reaches you before you turn. She does not step fully into the street. Instead, she remains just inside the doorway, where shadow meets sunlight, calling one last reminder after you. Greet your uncle if you see him near the forum. Walk beside the fountain rather than through the market crowd. Do not forget who may be listening when you speak with friends. Advice like this belongs to many Roman mornings. It is not meant to limit you. It is meant to guide you through a city where actions travel faster than explanations. A greeting offered too late can be remembered. A careless laugh can be repeated. A respectful nod can return later as unexpected help. You nod once and continue walking. Ahead of you, Marcus is already crossing the open space near the fountain. He adjusts his pace as an older man approaches from the opposite direction. They exchange greetings briefly, neither stopping long enough to interrupt the flow of people moving around them. These exchanges are small, yet they form a pattern that others recognize immediately. Courtesy in Rome is rarely dramatic. It is steady. From the edge of the square, two women pause beside a basket of folded cloth. Their conversation lowers as you pass, though their eyes remain attentive. Neighbors in Rome rarely ignore what happens around them. They observe quietly, collecting impressions the way households collect stored grain, keeping them until needed later. Reputation grows from these small observations more than from any single event. A group of younger boys runs past you toward the baths. Their movement is louder than yours, less careful, still shaped by the freedom of childhood that allows mistakes without lasting consequence. Soon enough, they too will learn to adjust their pace, to watch who stands nearby before speaking too loudly, to understand that the street itself remembers behavior longer than anyone intends. Near the forum entrance, the crowd thickens again. Here, clothing becomes even more noticeable. Some garments fall in heavier folds than others. Some carry wider borders. Some are cleaner, newer, or arranged with greater care. None of these differences need explanation. They are read as easily as familiar faces. You move through the space without hurrying. Walking too quickly suggests uncertainty. Walking too slowly suggests hesitation. Roman streets reward a balance between the two, a pace that signals confidence without drawing attention. Children learn this rhythm gradually, adjusting their steps until movement itself becomes a form of conversation. Behind you, your mother has already returned inside. Her reminder does not follow you any farther, yet its meaning remains. In many Roman households, mothers shaped reputation quietly from the doorway long before fathers spoke about public responsibility in the forum. Their guidance traveled with their children into streets they did not always enter themselves. A man near the fountain pauses as you approach. He studies your face for a moment, before nodding in recognition. Perhaps he remembers your father. Perhaps he remembers seeing you pass the same corner many mornings before. In Rome, memory does not belong only to individuals. It belongs to places as well. Streets recognize footsteps over time. You pass him and continue forward. Above you, a narrow line of sunlight slides slowly along the wall beside the forum steps, brightening the stone where many others have walked before you. The city does not speak aloud about reputation, yet it shapes it constantly, like a steady wind that changes direction without warning but never disappears entirely. Soon, however, the tone of the day will shift again. There are moments in the Roman calendar when expectations loosen slightly, when laughter grows louder and greetings become less formal, when even the careful boundaries of status soften for a short time. And when that season arrives, the streets themselves begin to feel different beneath your feet. There are a few mornings in the Roman year when the city wakes differently. The sounds begin the same way at first. Doors open. Sandals move along the street. Vendors prepare their baskets. Yet something in the air feels lighter, as if the rules themselves have loosened their grip for a short while. Today is one of those mornings. Today is Saturnalia. Even before you step outside, the change is visible. A small sprig of greenery has been fastened beside the doorway. Someone in the next building has done the same. These quiet decorations appear across the neighborhood one by one, not in perfect order, but in a pattern that spreads like warmth through a shared meal. No one needs to explain what they mean. The city already understands. Inside your house, the morning begins with laughter instead of instructions. Your father sits at the table earlier than usual, not preparing to leave immediately for the forum. Instead, he is holding a small object wrapped loosely in cloth. When he places it in your hand, you feel its shape before you see it. It is a tiny wax figure, simple and carefully formed, light enough to carry easily in your palm. Small gifts like this are common during Saturnalia. They are not meant to impress. They are meant to connect. Romans call them sigillaria, little tokens exchanged among friends and family as reminders that even ordinary objects can carry warmth when offered at the right moment. You turn the figure slightly in the light. Its surface still holds the faint scent of melted wax. Someone nearby laughs again, louder this time, and the sound moves easily through the open doorway into the street beyond. Laughter travels differently today. It is not careful. It does not pause before turning corners. Outside, Lucius is already standing near the stairwell with a similar gift in his hand. He lifts it once, as if comparing it with yours, then smiles without speaking. Conversation feels less necessary this morning. The city itself is doing most of the talking. As you step into the street, the difference becomes clearer. A man who usually passes quickly without greeting now pauses to exchange a few words with a neighbor. Two children run past carrying small bundles tied with string. Someone farther along the road is singing quietly, not well, but with confidence that no one will mind. Saturnalia allows these small changes to settle naturally into daily movement. In many households, masters and servants share the same table during this festival. The arrangement does not erase the differences between them. It simply turns them gently for a moment, the way bread is turned once while baking so that both sides warm evenly. Macrobius, a writer who described Saturnalia long after it had become a tradition, explained that such reversals reminded people that fortune itself can change direction unexpectedly. You pass a doorway where this reversal is already visible. A servant sits near the front of the table, laughing as the master pours wine into his cup. The exchange is relaxed, almost playful, though everyone present understands that it belongs to this day alone. Tomorrow, the usual order will return. Today, it rests. Near the corner shrine, someone has placed a small candle beside the painted figure in the wall. Its flame moves gently in the winter air, bright enough to catch your attention even from across the street. Offerings during Saturnalia often include light as well as food. Candles remind the city that the longest nights of the year are already beginning to shorten, even if the change cannot yet be seen clearly. Further along the road, a group of young people gathers beside a low table. Dice roll across its surface with soft clicking sounds. One boy lifts his hands briefly in surprise when the numbers fall in his favor. Games like this are more common during Saturnalia than at other times of the year, when gambling is usually discouraged. Today, however, rules step aside slightly, allowing chance to join the celebration. Lucius watches for a moment before continuing forward. He does not join the game yet. Instead, he listens to the laughter around him as if measuring how far the festival has spread through the streets already. Saturnalia arrives gradually, like sweetness moving through warm bread, reaching one corner after another until the whole city shares its flavor. At home later in the day, your family gathers again beside the lamp. More small gifts appear on the table. Another wax figure, a carved nut, a tiny clay cup. None of them are valuable in the ordinary sense, yet each one carries the same quiet message. For a short time, everyone may rest from the careful attention that usually shapes behavior in the streets and workshops of Rome. Even conversation changes slightly. People speak more freely. Jokes travel farther. Stories grow longer than usual. No one expects perfect seriousness during Saturnalia. Instead, the city allows itself to breathe more deeply, remembering what it feels like to move without measuring every step. Yet beneath the laughter, something steady remains. Everyone understands that this freedom is temporary. Tomorrow, the streets will return to their familiar rhythms. The forum will fill again with careful greetings. Workshops will open at the same hour as before. Reputation will settle back into place like dust returning quietly to a table after the door has closed. For now, though, the candles continue to glow along the doorways, and the sound of dice still rolls gently through the evening air. And somewhere not far from here, another kind of message is already waiting on a different wall, scratched carefully into plaster by someone who has discovered that even during ordinary days, feelings sometimes find their own quiet ways to be seen. Some feelings in Rome are not spoken aloud. They are written instead, quietly, where only someone looking carefully might notice them. A doorway, a column base, the plaster beside a fountain where water falls slowly into a shallow basin. These places hold messages that do not expect an answer immediately, only recognition. You notice one of them as you pass the fountain near the corner. At first, it looks like nothing more than a shallow mark in the wall. Then the light shifts slightly across the surface, and the letters become clearer. Someone has scratched a name there. Not deeply, not boldly, but with enough care that it will remain for some time. Marcus is already standing nearby. He is not touching the wall, though his eyes remain fixed on the letters. He reads them once, then again, as if the second reading might reveal something the first one did not. Around him, the street continues its usual movement. Sandals pass. Water drips steadily into the basin. No one stops long enough to ask what he has found. Messages like this appear often in Roman cities. In Pompeii, where streets and walls were preserved beneath ash long ago, thousands of such lines still remain. Some are jokes, some are advertisements, some are simple greetings, and some are unmistakably expressions of affection written by young people who wanted their thoughts to remain somewhere visible after they themselves had moved on. Marcus steps closer to the fountain. The stone at its edge feels cool beneath his fingers as he leans slightly forward to read the smaller letters beneath the name. Someone has added a second line later, perhaps days afterward. These additions often appear in layers. turning a single message into a quiet conversation that unfolds slowly across time rather than across voices. Water continues falling beside him. Public fountains in Rome are not only places to collect water, they are also places where people pause naturally without attracting attention. A longer pause here does not seem unusual. A second glance at a wall does not require explanation. Because of this, fountains become small meeting places where conversations can happen without being planned too carefully. You wait nearby, pretending to study the edge of the basin. Across the square, two girls pass together carrying folded cloth between them. One adjusts a ribbon near her shoulder as she walks. The movement is small, but not invisible. In Rome, gestures often travel farther than words, especially when words are expected to remain quiet. Roman writers understood this language well. Ovid, who once wrote instructions about courtship in his book known as The Art of Love, described how small signs could carry meaning across crowded spaces. A glance held slightly longer than expected. A message passed through a friend. A ribbon tied differently than usual. None of these actions guaranteed success. They simply created possibility. Marcus reads the message once more before stepping back. He does not remove it. No one does. Messages like these belong to the wall once they are written. They remain there for anyone who wishes to notice them, changing slowly as new lines appear beside old ones. Nearby, Lucius arrives carrying a small parcel wrapped in cloth. He sets it down beside the fountain while adjusting his sandal strap. The parcel contains a simple gift, nothing large enough to draw attention. Perhaps dried fruit, perhaps a small carved token. Gifts like these move quietly through Roman streets, passed from hand to hand without announcement. They are meant to be seen only by the person who receives them. Such exchanges rarely happen without limits. Families in Rome often expect marriage decisions to follow practical arrangements rather than private preference. Reputation travels quickly, and affection that becomes too visible can create difficulties not only for two people, but for entire households. Because of this, many young Romans learn to express interest indirectly, allowing meaning to remain gentle rather than declared. A group of boys nearby begins discussing a chariot race they hope to watch later in the week. Their conversation fills the space briefly, then fades as they move on. The message on the wall remains where it was, unchanged by the noise around it. Roman cities carry many conversations at once. Some are loud enough to echo through streets. Others remain quiet enough to live inside a single line of scratched plaster. Marcus lifts his hand once, almost touching the wall again, then lowers it. He does not need to read the message a third time. It has already settled into memory. Around him, the square continues its ordinary rhythm. A woman draws water from the basin. A child drops a pebble into the pool and watches the circles widen slowly across the surface. Someone calls a greeting from across the street. The message remains. In places like Pompeii, centuries later, these small lines would still be visible, carrying names and hopes across distances no one who wrote them could have imagined. They remind us that affection in Rome did not always arrive as a public promise. Often it appeared as something quieter, like a distant star visible only when the sky grows still enough to notice it. Marcus steps away from the fountain at last. He does not speak about what he has read. He simply joins the movement of the street again, carrying with him the knowledge that even in a city shaped by duty and reputation, there are corners where feelings leave their own careful marks, waiting patiently for someone to see them. Centuries later, in a different stone city far from Rome, the language of affection begins to sound different. Here the streets are narrower, the walls taller, and the spaces between people more carefully measured. Love still exists, of course. It has not disappeared, but it moves more slowly now, guided by rules that shape how it may be shown and how far it may travel before it must pause. You stand in the outer passage of a great household hall. The air smells faintly of beeswax from candles burning along the walls. Light gathers in small pools beneath each flame, leaving the corners of the corridor quiet and shadowed. Somewhere farther inside the building, a lute is being played gently, its notes moving through the stone passages like footsteps you can hear but not quite follow. A knight is waiting near the doorway ahead. He is not waiting alone, though no one stands directly beside him. Instead, a small group of attendants remains at a respectful distance, watching without appearing to watch. He adjusts the edge of his cloak once, then again, as if rehearsing a movement already known by memory. At the far end of the hall, a noblewoman passes briefly across the open space between two doorways. She does not stop, she does not speak, yet the knight lowers his head slightly as she passes, offering a gesture of recognition that is both formal and personal at the same time. No words are exchanged, none are expected. In this world, meaning often travels through silence more clearly than through speech. A young page stands near the wall beside you. He watches carefully. His task today is not to participate, but to observe. One day he may perform the same gesture himself. For now, he studies how long the knight's head remains lowered, how still his hands remain at his sides, how the moment ends without drawing attention to itself. Courtly love, as it is later described by writers such as Andreas Capellanus, depends as much on restraint as on feeling. In many aristocratic households of medieval Europe, marriages are arranged to strengthen alliances between families rather than to follow private affection. Because of this, admiration often takes a different path. Instead of leading directly toward marriage, it becomes a form of devotion shaped by distance. Knights speak of serving a lady with loyalty and respect, even when they expect nothing in return beyond recognition. The lute continues playing somewhere deeper inside the hall. Its rhythm rises slightly, then settles again, repeating a pattern that seems designed to remain unfinished. Music like this often accompanies gatherings where conversation moves quietly between small groups rather than filling the entire room at once. The sound creates space rather than closing it. The knight lifts his head again. For a moment, his expression remains thoughtful, as if the gesture he has offered still continues even after the noblewoman has disappeared from view. Courtly affection often works this way. It extends beyond the moment of exchange, shaping behavior long after the original encounter has ended. The page shifts his weight slightly beside you. He carries a folded letter in one hand, sealed carefully with wax. Letters like this sometimes travel between households, carried by attendants who understand that their contents must remain unseen. Written words allow admiration to move farther than voices can safely reach. Yet even letters follow rules. They must be phrased with care, framed with courtesy, and delivered at the proper time. Georges Duby, a historian who studied medieval marriage customs, later explained that such expressions of devotion existed alongside practical arrangements, rather than replacing them. Public marriage decisions belong to families. Private admiration belonged to individuals. Courtly love grew in the space between these two worlds, shaped by both, yet controlled by neither entirely. The noblewoman returns briefly, along the same corridor. This time she pauses near a window where winter light falls across the stone floor. The knight does not approach her. Instead, he places one hand lightly against his chest and bows again, a gesture smaller than the first, but no less deliberate. She inclines her head slightly in return before continuing onward. No conversation follows. The page watches the exchange carefully, then glances down at the letter he carries, as if measuring how its message might fit within gestures like these. In households such as this one, young attendants learn not only how to move through corridors, but how to move through expectations that shape every visible action. Outside the hall, wind moves along the outer walls of the building. Its sound enters through narrow windows, blending with the fading notes of the lute until the two become difficult to separate. Courtly affection often feels like this combination of distant sounds, present yet restrained, audible yet incomplete. For many young people growing up in aristocratic households, These gestures become part of daily observation. They learn how long to wait before speaking, how far to stand from a doorway, how to carry a letter without opening it. Each movement teaches patience. Each silence teaches attention. Love here is not absent. It is carefully arranged, like music played softly enough that only those listening closely can hear its full pattern. And in centuries that follow, another society will begin to shape young lives in a different way again, not through distance and corridors of stone, but through quiet instructions given beside curtained windows where the body itself becomes something to be watched and guided with equal care. In the same stone household where gestures travel farther than words, another kind of lesson is unfolding quietly. It does not begin in the great hall. Instead, it begins in a smaller chamber above the courtyard, where the light enters through a narrow window and rests across a wooden bench beside an embroidery frame. From here, the movement of the household can be seen without stepping directly into it. Corridors open and close below. Servants pass carrying folded cloth. Voices rise briefly, then soften again as doors close behind them. A young noblewoman sits near the window. She is not waiting for anyone in particular, yet her presence here is not accidental. In aristocratic households of medieval Europe, learning how to be seen at the right moment and how not to be seen at the wrong one becomes part of growing up as surely as learning to read or write. She lifts a glove from the table beside her. Its fabric is smooth, lighter than it appears, and stitched carefully along the edge so that it fits closely around the wrist. Gloves in courtly spaces often serve more than one purpose. They protect the hands, of course, but they also signal attention, restraint, and readiness. A glove held but not yet worn can suggest waiting. A glove worn too quickly can suggest impatience. Below the window, two attendants cross the courtyard together. Their steps remain measured, neither hurried nor slow. Movement inside such households carries meaning even when no one speaks. A quick step suggests urgency. A pause suggests uncertainty. A steady pace suggests belonging. Over time, young observers learn to read these signals the way shepherd dogs learn to follow the shifting edge of a flock without needing to be called. The noblewoman watches without leaning forward. Attention must remain visible but not obvious. She listens to the sound of voices passing beneath the gallery, measuring their tone rather than their words. Medieval etiquette manuals often advised young women to cultivate presence through stillness rather than display. Silence, in these spaces, becomes a form of conversation that does not require sound. On the embroidery frame beside her, a partially finished pattern waits. The thread has already formed the outline of a small vine climbing along the edge of the cloth. Each stitch repeats the previous one with only slight variation. Work like this allows the hands to remain occupied while the mind continues observing the room. It creates a rhythm that supports patience. Across the courtyard, a banner shifts slightly in the wind. Its fabric moves once, then settles again against the stone wall. Symbols like these carry authority even when no one explains them. Colors indicate alliances. Shapes indicate lineage. Young people raised within such households learn to recognize these signs gradually, often before they can describe them aloud. Footsteps approach along the gallery behind her. She does not turn immediately. Instead, she finishes the stitch already begun, sets the needle aside, and then rises. Timing matters. Turning too quickly suggests surprise. Turning too slowly suggests distraction. She finds the middle space between the two, where acknowledgement appears natural rather than performed. An older woman enters the chamber. Her greeting is quiet, but it carries weight. Conversation between them remains brief. Questions about the morning. A remark about visitors expected later. A reminder about where to stand during the evening gathering. None of these instructions are unusual, yet together they shape how the younger woman will move through the household before the day ends. In aristocratic courts, reputation depends less on what is said than on how presence is arranged. where you stand, when you speak, how long you remain beside a doorway before stepping aside. These details form a language as precise as handwriting. Those who learn it early move easily through corridors that others find uncertain. She places the glove on her hand now. The fabric settles smoothly along her wrist. Outside the window, voices gather again near the courtyard entrance as visitors arrive. Somewhere in the distance, a horse shifts its weight against stone. The sound travels upward through the walls, joining the quiet movement already filling the chamber. The older woman pauses near the doorway before leaving. She studies the younger woman once more, not to correct her, but to confirm what has already been learned. Approval in such spaces often appears as absence of correction rather than praise. It rests briefly, then disappears again into the rhythm of the household. The noblewoman returns to her seat beside the embroidery frame. From here, she can still see the courtyard below. Attendants continue passing. Visitors continue arriving. Each movement adds another layer to the pattern she is learning to follow without instruction. Emotional restraint in this world does not remove feeling. It arranges it carefully, allowing expression to appear only where it strengthens reputation rather than weakening it. Across the centuries, societies continue shaping young people in different ways. Some teach through public ceremonies in open forums. Others teach through quiet observation beside narrow windows. And before long, another kind of instruction will begin to appear, one that moves away from banners and corridors and into smaller rooms where doctors speak softly about rest, health, and the careful management of the body itself. In a quieter house, far from Rome's crowded streets and medieval stone corridors, another kind of lesson is unfolding beside a tall window. The curtains are partly drawn, not fully closed, but softened enough that the daylight entering the room arrives gently rather than directly. It settles across the floor in a pale rectangle that moves slowly as the afternoon passes. You sit within that light because the doctor has suggested that rest should be taken near fresh air whenever possible. Rest, in this household, is no longer simply the absence of work. It has become a form of instruction. On the small table beside your chair stands a porcelain cup filled earlier in the day. Its contents are mild, slightly bitter, and meant to encourage calm rather than sleep. Victorian physicians often believed that the body and the mind required careful balance during adolescence, especially for young women whose futures were expected to unfold within the responsibilities of household life. The clock on the mantel marks each minute quietly. No one asks you to hurry. No one asks you to rise. Instead, you are encouraged to remain where you are, breathing slowly, reading only for short periods, and avoiding anything that might excite the imagination too strongly. Even writing letters is sometimes limited, though today you have been allowed a few pages. You dip your pen into the ink and begin carefully. The letter does not describe illness. It describes the weather, the garden outside the window, and the sound of carriage wheels passing at intervals along the street beyond the gate. Such letters often filled afternoons like this one, offering movement through words when movement through rooms was discouraged. In the hallway outside, footsteps pass once, then again. They belong to a family member checking quietly to see whether you remain comfortable. Victorian households often treated rest not as isolation, but as supervision, softened into kindness. Curtains adjusted, chairs repositioned, books selected carefully. Each small change shaped the atmosphere around you without requiring explanation. Writers such as William Acton, whose medical advice circulated widely during the 19th century, suggested that emotional calm protected health more reliably than excitement did. Many families followed this guidance with sincere confidence, believing that stillness strengthened the future rather than limiting it. Outside the window, a branch moves once in the wind. Its shadow crosses the wall slowly, then disappears again. The doctor has explained that long hours of reading difficult books might tire the nerves. Too much study, some believed, could disturb the delicate balance needed for adulthood. Because of this, lessons are sometimes shortened. Walks are sometimes supervised. Afternoons like this one become part of a routine intended to guide growth gently rather than quickly. On the chair beside yours rests a folded shawl. It has been placed there in case the air near the window becomes too cool. Comfort is arranged carefully in rooms like this. Temperature, light, and sound are adjusted with quiet attention so that nothing unsettles the calm expected to support recovery and strength. You continue writing. Ink dries slowly along the edge of each line before the page is turned. The letter grows longer than expected, though it contains no urgency. Many young women during this period wrote similar letters while following rest routines that shaped their days into measured intervals of reading, conversation, and stillness. In the next room, voices speak softly. Perhaps a doctor has returned for another visit. Perhaps a parent is repeating instructions about how long the afternoon rest should continue. These conversations rarely sound severe. Instead, they carry the tone of careful concern. Medical advice in Victorian households often entered daily life, the way weather enters a landscape gradually, shaping decisions without needing to be announced each time it changes direction. Outside, a carriage passes more quickly than the others. Its wheels leave a faint echo against the gate before the sound fades along the street beyond. Movement continues elsewhere, even while your own day remains quiet. Many families believed that such quietness protected the future by allowing the body to develop without strain. The letter is nearly finished now. You pause before writing the final line, watching the shadow of the branch return briefly across the curtain. Time moves differently during afternoons like this. It stretches rather than gathers, leaving space for reflection where earlier centuries might have expected action instead. Across Victorian Britain, many young women experienced similar routines. Some spent weeks beside windows like this one. Others followed shorter periods of rest between lessons and visits. The intention was rarely to restrict opportunity deliberately. Instead, families believed they were offering protection, shaping lives with the same care they used when arranging furniture, selecting books, or planning journeys. You fold the letter carefully and set it beside the porcelain cup. Outside, the wind has grown slightly stronger now, carrying the sound of distant voices from beyond the garden wall. Somewhere far from this quiet room, other young people are being prepared in very different ways, learning to ride across open hills, to command soldiers, and to imagine futures measured not in stillness but in distance. And before long, one such young life will begin moving across landscapes wide enough that even the horizon itself seems to step aside to make room. Morning begins differently here. There are no narrow stairways filled with neighbor voices, no shaded courtyards where embroidery frames rest beside stone windows. Instead, the air opens wide around you. The hills beyond the palace rise slowly into pale light, and the first sound you hear is not conversation, but horses shifting in their stalls below the terrace. Their breath rises in small clouds against the cold. Even before breakfast, movement has already begun across the courtyard. Stable hands carry brushes, young companions tighten straps along saddles. Someone calls a greeting across the yard, and the reply comes back quickly, carried farther than it would in a crowded city street. Macedon does not wake in layers the way Rome does. It wakes all at once, like a field startled into motion by passing hooves. You step outside with the others. Leather reins feel firm in your hand, still cool from the night air. Around you stand boys of similar age, each belonging to a noble household whose loyalty connects their future to yours. These companions are not only friends. They are witnesses to one another's growth. One day they may ride beside you in battle or stand beside you in council. For now, they learn the same lessons together in quieter ways. Royal childhood in Macedon rarely happens indoors alone. Training begins early, and often takes place beyond palace walls. Riding across open ground teaches balance before explanation. Hunting teaches attention before command. The land itself becomes part of education, offering distance where earlier lessons in Rome were shaped by narrow streets and close observation. A horn sounds from the edge of the training field. The horses move first. Their ears turn toward the sound before their riders do, as if the animals understand the direction of the day more quickly than anyone else. You follow their movement, adjusting your grip slightly as your horse steps forward with steady confidence. Learning to ride here is not treated as a separate skill. It is treated as a beginning. Plutarch later described how Macedonian kings expected their sons to grow familiar with hardship while still young. Cold mornings, long rides, uneven ground beneath their feet. These conditions were not obstacles, they were preparation. A ruler, it was believed, should move comfortably across the same landscapes as the people he hoped to lead. The path ahead slopes gently downward. Tall grass bends beneath the hooves as the group moves together across the hillside. No one speaks for several moments. Silence during riding is not unusual. It allows each person to listen to the wind, to the rhythm of movement, to the quiet signals shared between horse and rider that do not require instruction. Beside you rides Hephaestion, one of the companions who will remain close to Alexander for many years. He says little this morning. Instead, he watches the line of riders ahead, adjusting his pace when yours changes. Friendships formed in places like this often depend less on conversation than on shared direction. Riding together creates understanding that grows quietly, step by step. When the group reaches the edge of the training ground, the horses slow. A small clearing opens between stands of low trees. Here the exercise changes. Targets are placed at a distance. Spears are lifted carefully. Each movement repeats the same pattern learned earlier, though never exactly the same way twice. Training in Macedon rarely separates physical strength from judgment. Both are expected to grow together. Later in the morning, you return toward the palace. The courtyard now holds a different kind of gathering. Men stand in conversation near the entrance hall, their voices steady but measured. Some wear cloaks marked by travel. Others carry messages tied with narrow cords. Political life does not wait until adulthood begins. It unfolds nearby from the start. Young Alexander pauses near the edge of the group. He does not step forward immediately. Instead, he listens. This is how many early lessons in leadership begin, not through instruction, but through attention. Names are spoken. Routes are described. News arrives from distant regions where decisions made here will soon have consequences. No one turns to explain the meaning of these conversations, yet their importance settles into memory all the same. One of the older men gestures briefly toward a map laid across a wooden table. The map shows hills, rivers, and towns drawn with careful lines. Alexander studies it without touching the surface. Geography in Macedon is not an abstract subject. It is something to be crossed, defended, and remembered. Knowing where a road leads can matter as much as knowing who travels along it. A horse stamps once behind him in the courtyard. The sound echoes against the stone walls before fading again into the open air. Movement continues everywhere at once, messengers arriving, companions speaking quietly, guards shifting position near the gate. Growing up here means learning to stand comfortably within that movement, rather than apart from it. Inside the hall, a council meeting begins. Alexander remains near the doorway at first. He watches the exchange of greetings between older men, noticing how each pause carries meaning and how each response arrives at the right moment, rather than too quickly. Leadership here begins not with command, but with observation that sharpens over time. Robin Lane Fox later described how Macedonian royal youth were expected to grow familiar with both riding fields and council chambers before they were fully grown. The two belonged together. Strength without judgment was incomplete. Judgment without strength was unreliable. A ruler learned both by moving between them, sometimes within the same morning. As the meeting continues, Alexander steps slightly closer. No one invites him forward. No one asks him to leave. His place is already understood. He listens as routes are discussed again, this time with more detail. A river crossing, a boundary marker, a message waiting beyond the hills. Each word adds another shape to the world he is learning to carry in his memory. Outside, the wind moves once more across the training ground where the horses now rest quietly in their lines. Before long, another teacher will arrive, not from the stables or the council chamber, but from the world of ideas itself. And with him will come stories older than Macedon's hills, stories about heroes whose choices still echo across distant generations. The teacher does not arrive with soldiers or horses. He arrives with scrolls. They are carried carefully into the garden where lessons will take place, not inside a crowded hall, but beneath trees whose branches soften the afternoon light. The place chosen for instruction lies at Macedon, a quiet sanctuary where water flows nearby and stone paths wind between shaded spaces meant for conversation rather than ceremony. Here, learning begins differently from the training fields. Instead of reins in your hands, there are pages. Instead of horns calling across hills, there are questions asked slowly enough that answers can grow before they are spoken. Aristotle walks beside the students rather than standing above them, pausing sometimes to let silence become part of the lesson itself. You walk with him along a narrow path between the trees. The ground beneath your feet is cool with shade, and the sound of running water nearby follows each step without interruption. Lessons in places like this are meant to move as you move. Ideas do not remain fixed in one position. They travel with the conversation. He begins with a story. Not a law, not a command, a story. It is the story of Achilles, the warrior whose courage shaped battles long before Macedon's kings ruled these hills. Aristotle does not speak of Achilles only as a hero of strength. He speaks of him as a figure whose choices carried consequences beyond the battlefield. Courage matters, he explains, but so does judgment. Speed matters, but so does patience. Alexander listens closely. Stories like these do not belong only to the past. They offer examples that can be carried forward, shaping decisions that have not yet been made. Plutarch later wrote that Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad beside him even during campaigns, reading it as both history and instruction. The scroll is opened carefully. Lines of text appear across the surface like paths waiting to be followed. Aristotle traces a passage slowly with his finger, not to hurry the reading, but to guide attention toward the shape of the story rather than its speed. Lessons here depend less on memorizing words and more on understanding what they suggest. Nearby, another student adjusts the edge of a rolled map, resting on a low stone table. The map shows rivers that do not flow near Macedon, mountains that rise beyond familiar routes, and coastlines whose curves suggest distances no one here has yet traveled. Geography in these lessons becomes a way of imagining movement before it begins. Aristotle gestures toward the map. He explains how land shapes the people who live upon it. A narrow valley teaches different habits than an open plain. A river crossing invites different decisions than a mountain pass. Ruling well, he suggests, requires knowing not only people but the ground beneath their feet. You study the lines carefully. Each river seems to lead somewhere just beyond reach. Each coastline suggests a horizon not yet crossed. Learning geography here does not mean copying names onto a tablet. It means learning how distance changes expectation. A bird calls once from the branches above. The sound passes across the garden and disappears again into the trees beyond. Aristotle pauses while it fades, as if allowing the moment itself to become part of the lesson. Education in this place does not rush forward. It settles gently, like evening light moving across water. Later, he speaks about nature. Plants growing along the edges of the path become examples. Stones collected beside the stream become questions waiting for answers. Aristotle encourages observation before explanation, asking the students what they notice before telling them what others have written. Science begins here not as certainty, but as attention. You kneel briefly beside the water to examine the surface of a leaf floating along the stream. Its movement changes slightly when it touches a small current. Aristotle watches without interrupting. He waits until you look up again before speaking about how small movements can reveal larger patterns. Nearby, Hephaestion listens as well. He does not speak often during these lessons, but his attention remains steady. Companions trained together in riding fields now learn together beneath trees. Friendship here becomes part of education rather than something separate from it. As the afternoon continues, the light shifts again across the garden. Scrolls are rolled closed one by one. The map is returned to its place beside the table. Yet the lesson does not end when the objects are put away. Ideas remain where they have been placed, turning quietly in memory long after the conversation has moved on. Aristotle walks a little farther along the path before stopping once more. He asks what kind of ruler a person should try to become. Not which lands should be conquered, not which armies should be gathered. Instead, he asks what qualities allow power to remain steady rather than fragile. The question stays with you as the group begins returning toward the sanctuary buildings. Above the trees, the sky has cleared enough that a few early stars begin to appear, faint but steady, in the pale evening light. Lessons like these often feel distant at first, like points of light too far away to guide your steps immediately. Yet over time, they form patterns that help you recognize where you are going long before you arrive there. And before many years have passed, the knowledge carried from these quiet garden paths will be tested not in conversation, but in decisions made far from shade, where messages arrive quickly and answers must follow even faster. There comes a moment when listening is no longer enough. Until now, much of your learning has taken place beside others, riding with companions across fields, walking beside teachers through shaded paths, standing quietly near the edge of council chambers while older voices shape decisions. But one morning, the pattern changes slightly. The voices are still there, the maps still open across the table, yet this time they are waiting for you to answer. Philip II has ridden south. The court remains behind him, steady but watchful. During his absence, responsibility does not disappear. It settles instead into the hands of someone younger than most people expect. At 16 years of age, Alexander is asked to remain in Macedon as regent, not only observing decisions now, but making them. The palace feels different when the king is away. Corridors grow quieter. Messages arrive more often. Footsteps pause longer outside doorways before continuing. Even the servants move with greater attention, as if each movement carries additional weight. Authority does not need to be announced aloud. It becomes visible in how others begin to wait before speaking. Late in the morning, a messenger arrives from the northern frontier. Dust clings to the edge of his cloak. His horse has not fully cooled from the journey. He bows once, then speaks quickly but clearly. The Maeadi, a hill people living beyond the northern boundary, have begun to move again across the frontier. Their movement is not unexpected, but it cannot be ignored. Alexander listens without interruption. The map on the table shifts slightly as a draft passes through the chamber. One corner lifts, then settles again. He places his hand against its edge, not to hold it still, but to study the line that marks the boundary described by the messenger's report. This is no longer a lesson described beneath trees. It is a decision. Within a short time, preparations begin. Riders gather in the courtyard. Supplies are counted. Orders pass quietly between officers who already understand their tasks. Authority in Macedon often moves like this, not through loud declarations, but through small adjustments that change direction without delay. As the group rides north, the air grows cooler. The land rises slowly beneath the hooves of the horses. narrowing into paths that wind between hills where watchfires sometimes appear at night along distant ridgelines. Frontier regions do not announce themselves with gates or markers. They reveal themselves gradually through silence, distance, and the careful movement of those who live there. The Maedi have withdrawn toward higher ground. Alexander studies the slopes before deciding how to proceed. He has seen maps before. He has listened to descriptions in council chambers. Now those lines and words must be shaped into action. Leadership at this moment resembles craft more than command. Each decision must fit the next one carefully, the way pieces of wood are joined so that the structure holds without strain. The riders advance slowly. No one rushes. Messages move along the line of soldiers in short signals that travel from one group to another without confusion. Training learned years earlier on open fields now becomes useful in ways that cannot be practiced indoors. By the time evening approaches, the position of the Maedi has shifted again. The response follows quickly. Plutarch later described how Alexander subdued the revolt and secured the region before establishing a new settlement there. The town would be called Alexandropolis, marking not only a place on the map, but a moment when responsibility became visible to others as well as to himself. Founding a settlement is not done with ceremony alone. It begins with choosing ground carefully. Water must be nearby. Roads must connect. Boundaries must be understood by those who will live within them. Decisions like these shape more than a single day. They shape the memory of authority long afterward. As night falls, watchfires appear along the edge of the new position. Their light moves across the hills in small, steady lines. Soldiers speak quietly beside them, adjusting cloaks against the cooling air. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the path back toward Macedon waits, though it will not be taken immediately. Authority changes the way silence feels. Earlier in life, silence beside teachers allowed space for learning. Now, silence beside soldiers allows space for judgment. Each moment carries expectation. Each decision leaves a mark that cannot easily be undone. Back in the palace days later, another messenger arrives. This time his news carries a different tone. The frontier has been secured. The new settlement stands where the hills once held uncertainty. Those who listen to his report understand what has happened without needing long explanation. A ruler has begun to appear, not in title alone, but in action. The map on the council table is unrolled once more. Where earlier there had been only a boundary line, now there is a name: Alexandropolis. It rests there quietly among the rivers and hills already marked across the parchment, a small addition that suggests something larger still unfolding. Some young people are given rooms to arrange as they grow older. Others are given territories to shape. And beyond these hills, the horizon continues widening, carrying with it stories older than Macedon itself, stories of heroes whose footsteps still echo along distant roads, waiting to be followed again. Even after maps have been redrawn and frontiers secured, some of the most important journeys still take place in quieter spaces. Night settles slowly across the camp. The last voices fade from the watchfires along the edge of the hills. Horses shift their weight once or twice before growing still. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a river continues moving through darkness without needing to be seen. The air carries a faint coolness that belongs to open ground rather than palace walls. Inside the tent, a small lamp burns beside your resting place. Its light is steady but narrow, enough to illuminate a single scroll spread across your knees. The parchment carries lines copied long before you were born, words that have traveled across generations the way wind travels across valleys, reshaping what it touches without ever stopping completely. The story is familiar. It is the story of Achilles. You have heard it before beneath trees at Mieza, when Aristotle spoke about courage and judgment as companions rather than rivals. Now you read it again alone, not as a lesson given by a teacher, but as something closer to conversation. Each line suggests choices made long ago that still seem to echo across the present. Plutarch later wrote that Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad near him, even while traveling. Some traditions say he placed it beneath his pillow when he slept. Whether this detail is exact or symbolic, it captures something true about how stories shaped his understanding of himself. For many young rulers of the ancient world, heroic poetry did not belong only to entertainment. It belonged to preparation. Outside the tent, a guard passes quietly. His footsteps remain measured, steady enough to suggest confidence rather than urgency. Alexander pauses in his reading for a moment, listening to the rhythm before returning his attention to the scroll. Even silence carries instruction when you are learning how to recognize responsibility in every sound around you. Achilles appears in the story not only as a warrior, but as someone who must decide how to balance honor with patience. These decisions matter. Strength alone does not make a leader memorable. It must be shaped by choice. Stories like this offer examples that remain available long after the battles themselves have ended. They allow the reader to walk beside earlier figures without needing to follow their path exactly. The lamp flame moves slightly as the night wind shifts the edge of the tent fabric. Light travels across the parchment unevenly for a moment, then settles again. Reading by lamplight changes the pace of thought. Words arrive more slowly than they would in daylight. Each sentence has time to remain in the mind before the next one appears. Nearby, Hephaestion rests beneath his cloak. His breathing remains steady, though he has not yet fallen fully asleep. Companions who train together often share evenings like this one, where conversation fades but presence remains. Friendship in such moments becomes another form of preparation, shaping confidence that will later appear in decisions made far from campfires. Alexander turns the scroll slightly. The passage now describes Achilles standing beside the shore, watching ships waiting to depart. The image feels close, even though the distance between the story and the present moment is measured in centuries. Heroic literature often works this way. It shortens time without needing explanation. Greek traditions also carried another belief alongside these stories. Many rulers understood themselves as connected, at least symbolically, to divine ancestry. Alexander's own lineage was sometimes described as reaching back to Zeus through earlier generations. Whether taken as history, myth, or something between the two, such claims shaped how kings imagined their place within the world. Identity grows differently when it includes stories like these. Responsibility becomes larger, decisions become heavier. The future begins to appear not only as something to be managed, but as something to be fulfilled. Outside the tent, the river continues moving through darkness. Its sound remains constant, though its direction cannot be seen. Alexander closes the scroll slowly and rests his hand against the folded cloak beside him. The story does not end when the reading stops. It continues quietly in memory, returning later when choices require comparison with examples already known. Some traditions describe how Alexander later visited the burial place believed to belong to Achilles. Standing there, he is said to have honored the hero whose story had accompanied him since youth. Whether every detail of that visit can be confirmed or not, the gesture itself reflects a wider truth. Leaders of the ancient world often walked deliberately through landscapes connected to earlier legends, allowing those places to shape their understanding of what might still be possible. The lamp grows smaller as the oil burns lower. Outside, the wind shifts once more across the hillside, carrying the scent of distant water and grass through the opening of the tent. Night in such places does not feel empty. It feels expectant, as though something beyond the horizon is already beginning to move closer. Stories like the Iliad do not predict the future. They prepare the imagination to recognize it when it arrives. And across the centuries, long after these lamps have faded and these camps have moved on, young people in other cities and other households will continue waking into expectations, shaped just as carefully by the worlds around them each beginning the same quiet journey in a different place beneath the same wide sky. Long before maps are drawn or letters are written, your life begins with the place where you wake. Morning returns again, not in the Macedonian hills this time, and not beside the curtained window of a quiet Victorian house, but in a narrow Roman street where the first sounds of the day arrive gradually. A rooster calls once. Someone lifts a shutter. Bread warms in a nearby oven. These small signals gather together like familiar notes in a melody you have already learned to recognize without thinking. Lucius is awake before the sun reaches the upper walls of the building. He sits near the doorway, tying the cord at his shoulder, while his father prepares the workshop tools that will shape the rest of the day. The smell of wood shavings will follow them both into the street soon. No one announces that he is learning responsibility. It simply arrives beside him each morning, as ordinary as the light entering through the stairwell. Above him, Flavia is already turning wool between her fingers. The thread grows longer with each careful movement. Her mother watches without speaking, not because instruction has ended, but because repetition itself has become the teacher now. In households like theirs, preparation for the future does not appear suddenly. It gathers slowly, the way sound gathers in a room, before anyone notices that conversation has begun. Across centuries and across landscapes, mornings like this continue to unfold. In a medieval stone corridor, a young page once watched a knight lower his head in formal devotion without speaking a word. That moment taught him something about patience. In a quiet upper chamber, a noblewoman learned how stillness itself could become a form of authority. No one wrote these lessons on tablets or scrolls, yet they remained. Later still, beside a tall Victorian window, another young person learned how rest could be understood as protection rather than delay. Curtains softened the daylight, letters filled the afternoon. Doctors spoke gently about balance and care. Even silence there carried meaning. And far beyond these houses and corridors, a boy in Macedon once followed the movement of horses across open hills while listening to stories older than his own kingdom. He learned that maps could widen the imagination before they widened the world itself. He learned that stories could shape decisions long before armies began to move. Each of these mornings belongs to a different place. Yet all of them ask the same quiet question. What kind of adult is the world preparing you to become? In Rome, the answer often began in the street. You learned how to greet neighbors before learning how to speak in assemblies. You learned how to walk at the right pace before learning how to stand in the forum. The city itself shaped you the way steady footsteps shape a familiar road. In medieval courts, the answer often began in the corridor. Distance carried meaning. Silence carried intention. A single gesture could remain visible longer than a conversation. Young people there learned how to move carefully through rooms where reputation traveled faster than voices. In Victorian households, the answer sometimes began beside a window. Stillness became a form of guidance. Health became a language of expectation. Families arranged furniture, books, and daily routines with the belief that calm would strengthen the future rather than slow it. Preparation arrived not through movement, but through careful attention to balance. And in Macedon, the answer often began on horseback. Responsibility arrived early. Maps unfolded before decisions were required. Stories about heroes settled into memory before the horizon itself began to widen. Youth there meant learning how to carry distance rather than avoid it. Nicholas Orme, who studied childhood in medieval Europe, later observed that young people in earlier centuries were rarely separated from adult life as clearly as they are today. They entered its rhythms gradually, sometimes without noticing when the change had taken place. Beryl Rawson made similar observations about Roman families, where responsibility often arrived quietly through daily participation rather than formal instruction. Growing up in many parts of the past did not begin with a single moment. It began with repetition. Bread passed from one hand to another at breakfast. A wax tablet pressed gently beneath a stylus. A thread drawn steadily between careful fingers. A map opened across a wooden table. Each of these actions carried expectation without needing explanation. Lucius steps into the street now. The vendor near the corner is already calling out the freshness of his olives with more confidence than certainty. Someone laughs from an upper window. A cart rolls slowly across the stones where morning light has just begun to settle. Flavia pauses beside the window before returning to her work. For a moment, she watches the same street from above, seeing the movement below in a way that belongs only to her position in the house. Then she turns back toward the spindle, continuing the thread she began earlier. Nothing unusual has happened, and yet everything has begun. Across centuries, across languages, across cities shaped by stone, wood, or open hills, young people continue waking into expectations that feel ordinary at first and meaningful only later. The past does not belong only to kings or scholars. It belongs to mornings like these, where responsibility arrives quietly and remains. And somewhere, even now, another door is opening onto another street, where someone younger than expected is stepping forward into the same long human story for the very first time.